welcome to the Importance of Staying Earnest, the podcast where we discuss the elements of taking on a career in the arts as a young person in the modern day. So sit down, stand up, grab a tea or something stronger and come with us on our journey to find some direction in our lives. My name is Emily and with me is my fellow host and good friend Harry. Hey Harry, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm not bad.
Good.
Doing all right. How are you doing, Ems?
I'm all right. We're actually recording this on Valentine's Day, and that leads me into who we have as a guest. So sorry, Harry, that this is how you're spending your Valentine's Day, but our guest today is in fact my boyfriend Ollie, because we are talking about sort of creating your own work and sort of not waiting for people to give you opportunities, but making your own as you embark on a career in the arts.
How romantic.
I know. What better way to spend Valentine's Day? How do you feel about this scenario, Harry?
Honestly, it's quite... people who know me, this is quite on brand for me. just hanging around where I probably shouldn't be and just kind of ruining everyone's Valentine's Day.
Well, I wouldn't describe it as you're ruining it. And hey, at the end of the day, Ollie's being a guest on our podcast.
True.
It's
He's the third wheel, not me.
Definitely. I'll let him know. Cool. Well, without further ado, hi, Ollie.
Hello. I was actually here for all that, but I didn't want to chime in and butt in as a third wheel, you know. Sorry, Harry. But yeah, hi, I'm Ollie.
No. Butt in all you like, man. It's all good.
This is Ollie. I mean, I could just talk about who you are and what you do, but would you rather introduce yourself?
Yeah, I can introduce myself. Thank you. I'm Ollie. I'm a Manchester-based composer and arranger and singer. I graduated from the RNCM, Royal Northern College of Music, a couple of years ago, and I stayed on here working in Manchester. And I direct a vocal group called the Apex Singers in Manchester as well.
And yeah, and so obviously, like you mentioned that you've got your own group, the Apex Singers. And I know like we've had conversations about this in the past, but I think you're quite a big sort of proponent of, making your own work, making your own luck, but also your own opportunities. Why do you think that that's important when trying to start into the arts, and like why would you say that that's sort of a good way of going about it?
I think it's really essential. Firstly, the way I got into doing that, I think, is quite important, which is I got into vocal music because I was a chorister at Canterbury Cathedral, and then I got into writing at sixth form. Big guns. I got into writing music at sort of sixth form level, and I found that when I was writing music for ensembles that I didn't play the instruments of, so for example writing music for orchestras and big bands and stuff, I had so much less control over the final product of the music, be it because I didn't understand the instruments well enough, or be it because writing for sixth form students, they're not going to be able to play everything I want them to play because of their ability. So at that level, I ended up starting to write for my own voice and writing for saxophone, because I used to play the saxophone. So actually the two types of music I wrote most of at sixth form was a cappella tracks for me to overdub myself singing with myself, because I had complete control and I knew how that was going to sound and come out. And then also writing for my sixth form saxophone ensemble, because I also had a lot of control over what that was going to sound like in the end. And I think that kind of stemmed this whole sort of idea of just writing for things I have control over. And that also played into this whole creating my own opportunities for myself, and creating my own ensembles to write for that I, was giving myself briefs for, which I really enjoyed. And then it sort of, in terms of the career aspect, that came about when I came to college in Manchester and I started, applying for commissions and competitions, and like many people, got several rejections, back to back, and it's just quite a lot to go through. And I think it clicked around second, third year. I was just sort of like, why am I trying to force my creativity into these briefs that someone else who's never met me before has designed? And I think that does work for some people. Some people like to have those restrictions, but personally, it just didn't make sense to me. And I decided very early on in my degree that I knew I was going to want to create an ensemble to graduate with that I was basically had complete control over. I was writing for singers that I knew the voices of inside out, and I was creating music that I was creating the briefs for. And that's kind of where this ethos came about for me of, well, would I rather spend, all this time writing a piece to a brief that someone else has set on the off chance that if they like the music I write, I might get $1,000 in prize money? Or would I rather spend this time writing a piece of music for a group of musicians that I know and have met and understand how they work, to a brief that I want to do and I'm passionate about, and instead of the prize money, getting a performance out of it or a recording that's going to further my career, Yeah. And that was like the decision I had to make in second, third year.
Yeah, so obviously I'm not a writer. Obviously neither me nor Harry are musicians, so we're coming at this from more of a theatre, TV, film perspective. But I know that since graduating, I've very much kind of, I suppose, gone through some of those same things that I suppose you went through just a bit earlier, because you went down the vocational route of going to a conservatoire rather than like academic university.
Yeah, and there's a big difference there as well.
Yeah, huge. But yeah, I think, I definitely get that on the like side of kind of getting frustrated when you're putting all this time and energy into applying and pitching ideas and such for people who might just turn around and say, oh no, we prefer this other one, which, is fine. But I think, I guess I'm basically just saying that I agree with you in terms of, it's so much more rewarding to spend that same amount of time working on things that that you can actually do and will come into fruition.
Well, I think this is the other thing is a lot of it is to do with the long term and looking at the long term of it. I do think that those competition and commissions obviously have their place and they're really good at doing certain things and for certain people. And obviously I kind of wouldn't have the ethos I have now of creating my own opportunities if I hadn't gone through that process.
Yeah.
And you feel like that's more fulfilling to have gone down that route?
For me. But that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that what I'm doing is right or wrong. That's just the route I ended up going down. Now I love the Apex Singers. As Tandy will probably tell you, the Apex Singers is kind of my life. So
yeah.
Which I'm super pleased about because it's something that has just come from passion. Like it's every decision that's been made about the group and its sound world and its ethos and everything that the Apex Singer stands for has been made by myself over the last 3 years. Whereas I could be a composer sat here and I could be equally as successful / unsuccessful having done commissions and competitions and following other people's briefs.
And I guess also like as someone who, because we sort of ended up, actually as it happens, we kind of got together about the same time that you created the Apex Singers. I've sort of seen you and been there while you've done quite a lot of it. And you work phenomenal hours into, like, you put so much time, effort,
Tandy
energy.
Tells me off all the time.
He doesn't know how to take a break. And actually, now that I've sort of started up Proxemics, I get it more. The amount of times over the last couple of years I've told you, like, just take a day off or like an afternoon or just plan to do something nice for yourself. And now I do get it, because when you're starting out, you're effectively trying to do like at least 5 people's jobs, granted on a smaller scale than they would be to when it's like a bigger established company group or whatever. But, you can't afford to pay a separate marketing manager and someone to like do all the scheduling, and you're having to do all the business side as well as the creative side, and that does just take time. And I think it's quite easy to fall into this trap of feeling like, well, if I'm just sort of sat around watching TV for the afternoon, well, actually I could be using that time to further what I'm creating and to get ahead of these other things that I know I need to do before next week, because I said that I'd get this done and this done. And I think it is hard to strike that balance.
I think it's especially been hard during the lockdown.
Yeah.
Because we were having this conversation the other day.
I was about to ask if it's the opposite. Now you can't do anything else.
Well, but I guess what I'm saying is it is unhealthy.
Yeah.
To a certain extent, to work as much as I occasionally do, and Tandy as well. We're both
and now you don't even have the excuse.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. We were
break.
literally saying the other day, the joy of actually being able to go away on a holiday is you can't work. Well, to a certain extent, obviously.
You can take your laptop.
Yeah, but the idea of being away from, your setup, where your contacts are and everything. Whereas what we were saying was while at the moment we can say, okay, well, we're going to take a week off here, as a holiday or half term, end of term, whatever. We're still here.
So it's always there.
It's always there. And so it's still like, even if we try not to do anything, it's still like, we really ought to be, because that's the way, unfortunately, a lot of creators are wired in this industry now, is that every minute that you're not spent working on your career and your passion, you're falling behind of everyone else.
Yeah. I think
there's
such
a shame, because it's not healthy.
Well, no, that's the other thing that I was going to bring up, which is that case of there's a narrative that goes around, and I think we've discussed this, Emily, the competitive narrative of every minute that you're not working is a minute someone else is, and that's what's going to cause them to beat you. And that can become insane. I've suffered quite a bit with that, which is I have a very, very annoying lazy streak in me that my body will just basically say, I reject doing anything today. Stop doing things. And my brain will have the opposite, which is I kind of have to do things today, but it's literally like lifting a lead weight from my shoulders just to sit down and type something or work on something. And even for this podcast, it's things like I've got to do the graphic design work. And sometimes I'll sit down and it's like, that's great. But then I'll go do something else. And always in the back of my mind is, that's not done. You need to spend an hour finishing this. Yeah. And so do you have any ways of dealing with that, either of you?
Well,
suffering.
I think. So I like Harry. Obviously, you've known me since school, and I have never been good at being bored. Like I've always been someone who's had a million things on the go.
Minimum 6 projects juggle.
Yep. Well, yeah. The other day we had this conversation, didn't we? And you described me as a juggler, and you as an archer. In that I tend to have loads of things that I'm doing at once, and I'm quite good at, on the whole. Of like keeping them all in the air, whereas you sort of end up almost going like big project, all in, like all focus on that.
I really like that analogy. That's really nice.
Point me in a direction.
Juggler and archer. That's nice.
And so I think because I do have like quite a busy brain, usually I am quite good at just sort of at least eventually getting to a point when I'm like, I will feel better when I do something. And again, I guess that kind of is why I find it hard sometimes to not do things. So I guess for me, it's more of if I'm feeling stressed out about things, it's usually because I need to be doing this. And either I myself will eventually go like, right, come on now. Yes, I'm not going to get all of those things done today. That's like there physically are not enough hours in the day to do that, even if I pulled an all-nighter. So let's try and get this, and this done over the next few hours. Brilliant. Yeah. And when I can't do that myself, Ollie's actually very good at when I'm panicking and flapping. He'll be like, well, what can you do right now? Go on then. Like, what's stopping you from doing it?
This might sound like a left field question, but Ollie, are you a morning person or like a night owl?
Probably a night owl.
Yes.
I feel like a lot of creatives are though. I've got a lot of friends in the industry who are mostly night owls, and I think it probably stems from the whole, gigs and concerts and events are always in the evening, and then you socialise afterwards.
That's it.
Obviously, Tandy's a morning person now because of all her TV things.
Well, yeah. So I mean, the main job I'm working on at the moment, so I do some Saturday morning TV. So I'm up at like 4 a.m. every Saturday, and I mean, trust that's not the same story every other day of the week, and that does kill me off a bit, But even naturally, I am definitely more of a morning person than you are.
Oh, yeah. I wanted to cycle back to what we were talking about before, about what do we do about feeling guilty.
Oh, yeah.
Not working.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Because there's a lot of that going around at the moment.
Yeah. I think
a lot of creatives, because of the lockdown, are feeling like they ought to be doing stuff, especially because everyone who is doing things, all their output has gone online and onto social media because we can't do anything in person. So seemingly, to a lot of us, it looks like there's all of a sudden this huge influx of people who are doing things with their careers. But actually, it's probably there's a smaller ratio of people who are, actively being able to do stuff in lockdown. It's just that because everything's online and everyone's consuming things online now, it might feel like that. For me, I'm just like Tandy. I'm one of those people who I just can't be bored, so I will give myself projects as soon as one big Apex project like an album or concert is done. I will have the next thing planned and ready to go, so that I'm writing or mixing or doing something. And I think that does stem from the fact that I'm doing something that I'm incredibly passionate about. So personally, I never do feel that guilty or tired or anything, because I'm just doing what I love to do. It almost feels more like a hobby that I get paid for, which is nice. So I think on that point, all I'd say is if anyone is listening who hasn't yet is at the very early stages of making those kind of decisions, make sure that you're doing something that you are really passionate about.
Yeah.
Because that will help you in the long run.
Well, it's like, I remember, so in my final year of uni, we had quite a few people, like, professionals come in to chat to us about embarking on careers. And a lot of people would ask, well, how do you get into acting? How do you get into directing? Like, what are those steps? And literally all of them just said something to along the lines of, if you want to do it enough, you'll do it. And at the time, I kind of was a bit like, oh, that's not very useful advice.
That's not very helpful, is it?
But actually, it's true, because, at the end of the day, it's not the sort of job that you're going to suddenly land. You're not suddenly going to land a job as a director. Well, you might, but very, very few people are. Or as a in-house composer in Ollie's case, or anything like that. You're not going to suddenly land that sort of job. And whether it's you having that sort of energy and motivation every day to create your own stuff, or to be applying to these to jobs, to funds, to competitions or whatever, you are going to have a lot of self-motivation and a lot of drive. So unless you really, really, really want to do it because you absolutely love it, you are going to stop. Because
I remember having those supposedly inspirational lectures as well, where they're like, if you want to do it, you'll do it, and if not, otherwise. And it sounds so stupid at the time, but it's kind of true. Yeah, unfortunately.
It's interesting. So again, I don't know if you know about this, but one of the big reasons was for us setting this kind of conversation up is to kind of give those lectures or motivational points slightly more perspective. What's it been like kind of trying to follow that? It's almost like the 5 stages of grief. It's like the 5 stages of motivation. Initially you hear that and you go, no, I need the formula. It can't possibly be this kind of way. And then I think each of us are now in that position where it's like, okay, we're taking action, things are occurring, and there's movement in what we want to do. I think I'd argue, Ollie, you're probably the furthest along that road.
Thank you.
I don't know. Only in terms of, I am definitely not the furthest along that.
But
road
I mean, also,
right now.
So Harry, you graduated latest out of all of us. Me and Ollie actually graduated at the same time. However, he did a 4-year course on a vocational course as well, as opposed to an academic one.
Great.
Okay, you're a year older. But what I mean by that is that your final year was basically designed for you to set yourself up for. So even though you hadn't graduated at that point, you were working on the things that you were going to be doing after you graduated. Whereas in my final year, I was doing a dissertation and having to put most of my energies into doing that academic work. So even though we graduated at the same time, you have been working on it for longer than I have, and then the same again for Harry.
Graduating in 2020 is not a joy, because ordinarily when you graduate, it's kind of get the ball rolling really quick, right? Go do things, get out, go, do this, that, and the other. And the first however many months of that have just gone by have all been pretty stagnant. And so trying to find things, terrible timing.
Yeah.
I was like, it's going to be great. Being class of 2020, that sounds really cool and looks really good on a document. Unfortunately, it came with the caveat of being in the middle of not doing anything.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that we clearly all sort of have this slight drive out of anxiety to do stuff, and like this need of like straight off the bat out of university, like need to be creating things, doing things, etc., etc. And obviously so many people, I think particularly those who aren't off to do creative things, often end up almost having like a gap year after uni, especially if they didn't take one beforehand. And like, I think a lot of, and especially now that I've sort of been in the workplace a bit, like I've by and large been the youngest person there, and that's not me bragging. And a lot of people have been sort of said like, oh, like were you not tempted to go do some other things before you embarked on your career after uni and stuff? And well, as it turns out, it's not as if I can really do much traveling at the moment, but you know, I think we all sort of have this kind of feel like there's this rush to do stuff, and like, yeah, I think it's important to, you know, go and chase the things that you want to do and do the things that you want to be doing. But I guess maybe an important distinction to make is to make that drive, kind of as Ollie was suggesting, like out of passion for doing things and a want to be creating things, as opposed to an anxiety of I'm falling behind if I don't.
Yeah, maybe.
I think the other thing I've found, I don't think it is specific to music actually. I think it's probably for the broader arts as well. But there are some people who have said to me, so the music I make is arguably reasonably accessible, which some people may, you know, put down to why we're doing so successfully at the moment is I write very accessible music. It's quite listenable to for a broad audience. And I do get the question, well, I'm doing what I'm passionate about, but it's not something that's very mainstream, or like, so how do I make this work? And the one thing I would say is, no matter how niche what you're doing is, there will be an audience for it if you're an audience for it. So if you're passionate about what you're doing, there will be other people out there who want to listen to what you're creating or want to see what you're creating if you're doing, you know, theatre and TV or whatever you're doing. So I think it all does, as cheesy as it sounds, stem back to this idea of being passionate about what you're doing. And again, like we were saying, when you're starting out, you do have to do so many different roles. Like even now with Apex, I still do, you know, a stupid number of roles. I was doing a funding app just last week, and it's just so funny on funding apps because you have to clearly be paying everyone fairly for what they're doing, otherwise they don't fund these things, because obviously it's about fair funding for creators involved. But then it's also the awkward,
give me all your money.
Yeah, the awkward situation of where when your name is under every job bracket and under the fees for everything. It doesn't make sense that I'm applying for funding and the majority of the money is just going into my bank balance because I'm supposedly doing all these things. But I think that's the other tip that I wanted to say, the little motivational thing, is really, it's so important nowadays to have many strings to your bow.
Yeah.
It's not good enough. That sounds so harsh.
Wow, motivational. Wow. You're not good enough.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ollie.
Oh, wow.
That sounded awful.
It's not good enough. You're a one-trick pony. Get out. You're never making it.
Finish my sentence.
Welcome to the Importance of Staying Earnest, where we crush your dreams.
My point is that to succeed nowadays, you can't just be really good at one thing. Yeah. I think for most people anyway. But you might be really, really good at writing serious music, and that's great, well done. And like I said, there is obviously going to be an audience for that because you're passionate about it. But how do you find that audience? Well, you've got to be good at marketing. How do you create music that's going to reach people? Well, you've got to be good at managing your time.
Yeah.
And there's all these other little caveats. And how do you you got to be good at communicating with other people and getting a team around you that, you know, lift you up and do things that will help your career.
And actually, like on top of that, I think you also need to, because particularly if you are making your own work, chances are you're not going to be making enough to earn a living, at least while you're starting out. Like realistically, the first few years, you're probably not going to make your entire living off of what you're doing. And therefore, you kind of have to be particularly good at managing your time because you also need to find some sort of stream of income. And
particularly willing not to sleep as much.
Find all the insomniacs here.
Yeah.
It's a willingness, isn't it? It's a willingness to say, okay, I have to have half an interest in marketing because I have to know how to push my product to people, which sounds very cold, but it's kind of the nature of it. I have to have an interest in these other aspects of the industry that I go into. And, you know, we made fun of Ollie slightly for being like, you can't have this one thing that you do, but he's not wrong. I don't think it's a case if you have to be a prodigy in about 6 different subjects.
No, but I think you have to like want to do them enough. I mean, Ollie, I know you've really enjoyed like making websites and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I don't claim to be a professional web developer or a professional manager or any of the things that I do on the side. But it's just having an understanding that you will have to do those things in order to get there.
Well, speaking of your work, we haven't actually really spoken much about what the Apex Singers are.
No, okay, yeah.
So do you want to explain who your group are?
So I've mentioned sort of vaguely throughout
the
the Apex Singers are an 8-part vocal ensemble that I started maybe 3 years ago now.
Yeah.
It was the year we did Henrietta at the Edinburgh Fringe was the year I auditioned.
Yeah, that was 2018.
Yeah.
Oh, gross. Oh God.
Best not to think about.
Gosh. Yeah. So I started the group 3 years ago, and the idea behind starting the ensemble was I write a lot of vocal music and I understand voices because I grew up as a chorister. I've sung most of my life. I know how voices work. So I wanted to create an ensemble where I was writing for vocalists and I knew how everyone's individual voices worked and how they worked as an ensemble. The human voice is so different from person to person, even more so than like 2 clarinetists. And clarinetists will hate me saying that. But if you take 2 instrumentalists, they're going to sound somewhat similar. Obviously, everyone has a different style, but they're going to sound somewhat similar in terms of how you write for them. But if you take different vocalists, everyone's voice is completely different. And that's always massively fascinated me in my writing. And so the Apex Singers came about because I wanted to create an ensemble where I knew all the individual vocalists and what their sound was and how they blended together in different combinations, etc., etc. And then the first project we did was called Hiraeth, which is our first album. And that was a folk project. I've always loved folk music. This past year has obviously been an interesting one because after the album came out, we did an album launch concert at Halle St. Peter's, which is a venue here in Manchester. And I think I'm right in saying that we were the last concert before
I think so.
They officially fully shut. We were really that on the line. And then after that, we had effectively our first UK tour booked, which was really exciting to tour the album. And then that got cancelled, obviously. And then since then, it's been a really, really weird year. But we've just tried to keep as active as possible. We created an isolation series where we released new music every 2 weeks during the first lockdown, which is quite ridiculous. And then in December, we performed a live virtual concert.
Do you still plan on touring? Obviously, with the same album when hopefully all this is over.
I get this question quite often. Actually,
should I have not asked that? Is that a bad question?
The group actually have been asking me this as well recently.
Oh, really?
Yeah, well, because it's a really tricky one.
Yeah.
Because, well, as you know, Tandy, and I think I can say this on the podcast, but because it's fairly obvious, but we're putting plans in place to do things as and when COVID is no longer an issue, be it recording a new album or hint. Anyway, my point is, when we're able to do things together in person again, I guess the debate is, do we record the next album or do we go on tour? And this is something I've been contemplating a lot recently. And the problem is usually by this point, we're going to be, by the time we're safely allowed to do things again, I think we're going to be nearing the 2-year mark since Here I came out, our first album.
Yeah.
Because that came out a year ago.
And I guess also, like, irregardless of whether you do have another album out by then or whatever, you do have a load of new material through all of these isolation arrangements that you've done.
Yeah.
The amount of people who've asked us to make those into a studio album as well, because obviously those are recorded fairly rough because it's through everyone's home studios. We have a lot of people wanting us to make.
Although it's also quite fun. You can gradually see the like improvements that everyone has made as you go along.
That's a really fun game. If you listen to this, go and watch the first Apex Isolation Agent, which I think is Scarborough Fair on our YouTube channel, and listen to the quality of that in comparison to whatever we just released. You'll find it wherever. Go on the socials, and just listen to the difference in quality. Because I've mixed and edited a huge amount of audio since that first one. I've even done a course. Since then in audio mixing and editing, so the quality's changed drastically. But yeah, I mean, in answer to your question, Harry, sorry we digressed.
The answer is you don't know, basically.
I guess, yeah. I also think that we're probably the kind of group who long term it won't be a case of when we do a concert we perform this album. I think it's always going to be a case of we're just always building upon our repertoire, and whenever we do a live performance we can just choose whichever songs we want to do. It can be a combination of songs from various albums. I mean, now I was trying to figure this out the other day because I thought it would be a good tweet to try and figure out how many arrangements I've actually written for the Apex Singers. And I think it's nearing 50.
Wow.
Yeah. Not that they're all public.
No, but still. But we've talked about, the
Hashtag Dream of Genie.
Yeah, just to kind of to round off what we've been talking about this whole time has been do stuff, right?
Yeah.
Get up and get stuff done. I think if you've done 50 arrangements for this group that you've pushed across as being the thing that's pushed, like, that's allowed you to bring yourself forward into the scene, I'd say that's pretty decent evidence of doing things.
And making sure you're passionate about it, which I know we've mentioned a lot throughout the podcast.
Yeah, it is important.
But
and like,
I'd be surprised if you can arrange 50 things for something that over 3 years that you're not passionate about.
Which also comes back to the whole overarching theme of this podcast, I guess, which is make your own opportunities. Boom.
Yeah.
Drop the mic.
Well, I suppose on that point, shall we? So me and Harry, we're trialing this out today. Yeah. We have created a little segment that we want to try and do with each of our guest hosts.
Let's see how this goes.
And actually, this is kind of ironic for this particular episode as we talk about doing projects that you're passionate about and not just doing things to someone else's brief. So, Ollie, you might hate this. But essentially, we all know that when you're starting out, whether it's when you're a student or because you just sort of need to take the work when you're first doing your own bits and bobs, you sometimes end up doing projects where you get slightly wild briefs. Mm-hmm. And so we want to play this game where we will give you a brief and we want you to come up with an idea of how you'd make it work.
Oh, maybe that's what we call it. Maybe that's what we call this segment, Wild Briefs.
Wild Briefs, yes. Sounds like a boxer brand.
Yeah.
It does. That's, yeah.
So, Ollie, are you ready? We'll give you a second to think about it, and we've got some
that'd be nice.
prompts after.
When they say second, they're going to give me half an hour, and then we're just going to cut in the post.
I've got other stuff I need to do today.
Yeah, that's
Okay, so Ollie, you've been asked to write and put together a piece of music for the opening of a new theatre. Unfortunately, they don't have a large budget, so for the musicians, they're going to be using members of staff. One staff member can either play the violin or sing as an alto. One is a bass singer or can play the guitar. And one can either play the euphonium or the clarinet.
It's great that I mentioned clarinets earlier, isn't it?
Yeah.
My love for it.
So, yeah, we want you to come up with which of those instruments you might be using, what sort of piece you're going to write, how you're going to make it work, basically. But we'll give you a quick second to think about that.
Okay, well, I'll just talk through my thinking process while I go
for it
as well. Anyway, you got 3 members of staff here.
Yeah.
So you're creating.
It's a trio.
It's a trio. Yeah, well done. That's great.
Quick maths.
So obviously, as the vocalist and a songwriter, you'd think I'm gonna pick for the 2 that can sing. I'm gonna get them to sing. The you know about this because you're always around for my creative process. But one of the
Am I? I'm your muse.
You're not my muse. One of the the most time staking. What's the word? Time consuming. That's it.
Yeah.
One of the most time consuming parts of the writing process for voices is picking a text for me, because I don't at the moment write my own text really. So you got to take that into account. If I'm writing a piece for the opening of a theatre, what text am I setting for these vocalists if they're playing for voice?
You tell me.
But on the flip side, if I choose, what was it, a violin?
So we've got a violin or an alto for one staff member,
Yeah.
bass singer or a guitar player for the second, and then a euphonium or clarinetist for the third.
Yeah. So you see, if you're pitching to me opening of a theatre,
Yeah.
my mind instantly goes to fanfare.
Ah.
Problem is, I can't create a fanfare out of a violin, a guitar, and a euphonium. Arguably, you could, but
It might
as
be a bit.
fanfares go, it might be a bit underwhelming. So, I think actually, that all being said, I would probably want to go with the two singers and go down the route of trying to find a text that's appropriate for the opening of the theatre. Because that would be. I think that's a nice way to tie it into making sure that it's relevant to the opening of a theatre. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think if I'm writing for just the instruments, then how is this relevant to opening of the theatre? The other point I want to make is altos and basses. Oh, that's a pen combination. That is a really nice combination. Sorry, sopranos and tenors. You're great, but
You're a tenor.
I always find the word tenor funny because I always hear tenor as in 10 quid.
I'm multi-ranged.
Oh, I've heard Ollie putting learning tracks together for the singers. Him singing soprano lines is hilarious. Anyway,
Yeah.
sorry. Get back to you.
Anyway, yeah. So for this commission, I think I go alto, bass, and then what were the instruments for the last member of staff?
Euphonium or clarinet?
Okay, purely thinking about ranges here, I might go for euphonium.
Yeah.
Just to
Yes.
fill out that little.
Okay.
We've
maybe
started
clarinet.
the anti-clarinet club on this podcast, I think, today. We've done nothing but be like,
Okay, no,
clarinets, we're not taking them.
No.
They all sound the same.
My
Clarinets
flatmate's a
clarinets actually have a
clarinetist.
great range. They have a great range. So I would go for clarinet, alto, and bass. Yeah, no,
Okay.
that's a sick combo.
Okay. Harry, have you got any follow-up questions about his piece?
I know nothing about music, so
Oh, no.
so that would be
Well, in which case? Ollie, I think you've completed.
Did I
your
win?
brief.
Did I win the game?
You win the
I-
game.
You win.
Did I get the commission
So
fee?
I tell
Did
you
I
what
get
you
the commission
win.
fee?
So you win when I get up a timer on my phone. 30
You win.
seconds
Oh, Lord.
30 seconds of
to plug
plug.
whatever you
I thought
want.
this was going to be a sponsor. I'm the sponsor.
So yeah, I'll tell you when it starts. But you get 30 seconds to plug where people can find you, what you're up to, where you want people to look for you, Apex, anything you want. You ready? In
I don't
3,
think- Oh God. Okay.
2, 1, go.
Okay. I'm Ollie Lambert. You can find my personal stuff. I'm Ollie Lambert Music on all socials. And I also have a website, ollielambert.com, where you can keep up to date with the kind of stuff I'm working on. Mainly for the stuff that's outside of Apex, so some of my external commissions and things like that. I'm always doing those alongside my group. But for the Apex Singers, you can find all our socials, The Apex Singers. Our website's theapexsingers.com, and Patreon. Follow us on Patreon. That's where you can actually support the music we're making.
Oof. I was counting him down. Also, I accidentally set a 30-minute timer, so that was fun to try and work out what I was doing.
I can plug.
Wow, this is the longest 30-second plug of my life. How long have we been here?
So, thank you so much for coming on and having a chat
Thank you
with
for
us.
having me. This has been great. It's nice to verbalise things.
Yeah.
Have a chat about it.
Happy Valentine's Day, Harry.
Thanks, man. I'll enjoy it. Just... I really enjoyed that conversation, actually. I think what stuck out for me the most was the way that he discussed that jack of all trades style of the need to invest yourself in different skills, maybe ones that don't come as naturally to you, in order to further yourself. I think that's quite wise, because as we mentioned, I often find myself being very, very focused on one thing, and one of my downfalls can sometimes be that the periphery gets lost. And so on a project, occasionally the thing that, it's not even that I don't really want to do, but it's just not taking up my whole focus. Occasionally that can slip away from me, and being reminded and informed in such a big way from someone who's had success from it, that there's a requirement to push yourself in many different directions if you want to move forward in his, and I think in any kind of creative endeavor. I just think he spoke very eloquently on that.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, you know, he's definitely speaking from experience, and I think it is sort of the nature of the beast when you are starting out making your own work, because you're having to self-produce, and sort of like we mentioned with Ollie, you're not going to be able to afford to pay everyone to do everything for you. And so you're going to have to put in that time, that work, that effort. But I think the other thing that really struck me from our conversation was just how rewarding it can be when you have that self-motivation to do all of that work. And also the time, which is obviously a difficult one, especially when you're having to balance doing the work for this thing you want to get moving and get started, and, you know, having to earn money and stuff like that. But the idea that you can really work on projects that are things that you have created or you have decided that you want to do, it's something you've found, or you found someone that you want to work with, whether it is in music or self-producing a play or a film or a podcast or a TV show, whatever it might be. You know, I think, yes, it's really hard work, but it is super rewarding as well.
It really puts you at the front of it, which is really quite impressive. In that, you know, you really feel like you if you commit yourself, you can create what you want to create, and having the confidence to say, no, I'm going to learn a couple of things, and I'm going to get a couple of things wrong, and without that knowledge that you're going to throw yourself into different things, I think you're voiding yourself of your own potential in your own kind of the potentials that your ideas have.
And actually,
maybe that's too grand.
One word you said there, I think, is about right, in that you mentioned confidence. And I think particularly when you are sort of self-producing, there is a lot of confidence you need to have just in starting. Because as soon as you, I know I found this with Proxemics, as soon as you put these things out publicly, you know that there is a chance that in your eyes it might fail. And so, you know, it's creatively very rewarding, but having it all on you and on your shoulders can also mean that it's all on you and all on your shoulders if it doesn't go the way you hoped. It takes a lot to take swings like that, especially starting out, because you don't even have the backdrop of previous work that you may think like, oh, that's the good work, and then everything else, you know, I can have a couple of bad ones now. It's like, no, this is everything you put out. It's like, this is it, because this is all I have at the moment. And every single time, I imagine it gets easier. I think the amount that he's done now, I mean, he mentioned, I don't know if you remember him mentioning how much he'd done. You've been there. I remember obviously. It, don't you worry.
Yeah. But it was like, what was it? It was like 30, 40 different pieces of content that he's made. It's like,
well, yeah, so they've released an album, they've released a load of sort of pieces as singles effectively over lockdown, as well as various other bits and bobs, an EP at like Christmas, all sorts.
The will to just push that stuff out and really throw it into, and of the quality that I think it is. It seems, of the little that I've listened to. I don't know what do you reckon? What was your finding? What was your key moment in that conversation?
To be honest, I think the main thing for me that Ollie himself just completely and utterly embodies is that if you have that work ethic, and even if you don't, that self-discipline to force yourself into that work ethic, and that confidence to push forward with what you want to do, you will have some success. Whether that ends up being, you know, big time commercial success, that can take years. We shall see. But to be able to be having that sort of level of output of things that you are proud of and that people are enjoying, that's success. And so, yeah, yes, it's hard work. Yes, you need to put in the hours. Yes, you need to have the confidence to do it. But if you do it, it can be a really amazing thing.
Yeah. It was a very positive conversation. Very inspiring conversation, considering we started this to try and, you know, expose what the grind looks like. And we got a very inspirational, work hard and you can do things. It's like, oh, wow. Damn, I am going to go and do things.
But I think that's it. If you, you will do things if you work hard. You will, because if you put all that time and energy into something, there will be some sort of output. And, you know, I don't think Ollie was for a minute suggesting that that necessarily means that you'll be raking in millions a year. But like I just mentioned, if there's an audience that are enjoying it and you're putting that content out,
totally,
that is a success.
Totally.
So I think that rounds it all off quite nicely. A massive thank you to Ollie for coming on to speak to us. Sort of wrangled my boyfriend in to be our first guest. He was our guinea pig. I think
he handled it quite well. I think we handled it quite well as well. Maybe.
I agree.
We did indeed.
We did our best. It's only upwards from here. So yeah, you can find Ollie on all social media: Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, all of the things. He himself is Ollie Lambert Music, and you can find most of his work at the Apex Singers. Again, they're the Apex Singers on all your social media. Go check them out on YouTube. They've got some beautiful music videos on there. Spotify or Apple Music, wherever you get your music as well, they're all on there. And also on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram to see what they're up to next. Thank you for listening to The Importance of Staying Earnest. If you want to keep up with us outside of the podcast, you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at TIOSE_podcast or on Facebook at The Importance of Staying Earnest podcast. If you would like to reach out to us, you can find us at tiose.podcast@gmail.com. Please drop us a review if you enjoyed, and we'll see you next time.